It's safe to say that Total Warhammer 3 is a game where intelligence, strategy and thinking can help you win even the most challenging and sometimes impossible looking battles. Perhaps the only exception to that rule would be you fighting an army of bubonic plague-spreading vermin, but in that case, the best strategy is an aggressive and ethnically targeted mass genocide. But is it possible to beat Total Warhammer 3 by using the strategy and thinking of a Chinese war general Sun Tzu, famously known for the art of war? The main principles that Sun Tzu emphasizes throughout the book are: to subdue the enemy without fighting is the acme of skill, which basically means that battles are won before they even begin. Know the enemy, know yourself, and you need not fear the result of 100 battles. We have to strategize around the strengths and weaknesses of both our units and the enemies. All warfare is based on deception. Sun Tzu believes that victory doesn't come from strength or intelligence, but rather from manipulating your enemy into making mistakes, meanwhile creating as many advantages for yourself as possible. These are the main pillars of his approach that I will try to maintain, but there are a lot more principles that we'll get into when I will actually apply them. To keep it lore accurate, since we're applying Chinese tactics, I went with the faction that looks the most Chinese. I know it sounds racist, but between morbidly obese green monstrosity and freaky BDSM demon twins, it's hard to argue that Miao Ying feels like the most Chinese option. And so we begin. Before fighting these peasants, we have to choose our first technology. Sun Tzu strongly believes that you can turn even the most brain-dead individual into a grade A soldier, and if you can't, then it's your fault. If words of command are not clear and distinct, then the general is to blame. And meanwhile, that's way too much responsibility for me to take. I went with drill training to increase the ranks of our expandable shaft handlers. And since we have a clear advantage in numbers, these slum dwellers will be a perfect target to practice our first tactic. It is a military axiom not to advance uphill against the enemy, nor to oppose him when he comes downhill. As you can see, our army is up on a hill, meanwhile these impoverished commoners are below us. Before we even began our battle, they managed to commit one of the things that Sun Tzu would never do, which is be in the bottom. But meanwhile it's bad for them, it's actually very good for us. By standing on top of the hill and waiting for our enemy to advance, we managed to tire them out before they can even get to us. And after that, all we have to do is to unleash a prehistoric violence of 400 angry Chinese men and watch them turn our enemies into a consequence. Apparently we also possess an artillery unit in the form of a massive flying balloon that splits these peasants into micronutrients. And as far as I can tell, Sun Tzu never mentioned such technology in his book, but I suppose I wouldn't either. Needless to say, rather a simple victory for Sun Tzu, and after the fight we have to choose what to do with the remaining enemies. We can kill them, respect them, or extort them for money. Meanwhile, for some it might be a moral dilemma. Sun Tzu was very straightforward about it. A wise general strives to feed off the enemy. 1 bushel of the enemy's provision is worth 20 of our own, so ransom it is. The next fight takes place in the same location. Of course we could reinvent the wheel and come up with some mind-shattering tactical maneuver, but according to Sun Tzu, that would be dumb. Military tactics are like onto water, for water in its natural course runs away from high places and hastens downwards. In other words, he believed that winning should be easy and as low effort as possible, and I think subjugating a bunch of homeless to a subliminal war crime does not get any more low effort than that. Now that we captured the settlement, we can choose what to do with it, but only one option is the correct one. In the practical art of war, the best thing of all is to take the enemy's country whole and intact. To shatter and destroy, it is not so good. So we carefully occupy it, and now this province is ours. We also have to choose how to level up Miao Ying. Sun Tzu believed that logistics was one of the most vital things at war. The line between disorder and order lies in logistics. So without much thinking, we increase our campaign movement speed. In general, Sun Tzu didn't like wasting time because even back then people realized time is money. So I hired a lord that would take care of the supply chain of additional peasants for our main army without distracting us from much more important things, like capturing another settlement full of innocent farmers who just a second ago were living a completely ordinary life, but now were bombarded by a pair of massive bolts from the sky. After increasing our campaign speed, I didn't really find any skills that would improve our logistics, so instead I decided to focus on the ancient esoteric knowledge that later would give us an ability to precision strike our enemies across the map with a single thought. But for now, we have to take control of the epicenter of the underclass infestation. As you can see, we have an ability to siege the province and build some intricate contraptions in exchange for wasting an additional turn, but by doing so, we would disrespect Sun Tzu, because according to him, There is no instance of a country having benefited from prolonged warfare, so in that case, we're not gonna waste our time, and despite the unresolved calculations, looking like it's gonna be our first and the last siege, I decided to put my life in Sun Tzu's big Chinese hands and launch an attack. And now, all we have to do is to appropriate this capital. In general, Sun Tzu says that besieging the city walls is the worst thing that you can do as a general, but unfortunately we don't have many options. The best thing that we can do in this situation is to apply. Attack him where he is unprepared, appear where you're not expected. So after scouting the perimeter, I realized that things are looking catastrophic, because these peasants were protecting every gate. But after scouting some more, I noticed that these degenerates had seemingly forgotten about this entrance that leads straight to the center of the capital. So I leave a couple of units on every side to pretend that my brain-dead spearmen will rush through the gate at any possible moment and will start massacring everyone like a bunch of feral monkeys. Meanwhile, the real plan was to covertly send 2 groups of carpenters dressed up as knights and let them quietly disassemble this massive door. Meanwhile that was happening, these idiots were running back and forth, confused by our tactical superiority. Needless to say, Sun Tzu was right, and gaslighting our enemy into thinking that we're extremely demented works like a hospital clock. After a couple of hours looking at this door, we finally spread it open and were able to penetrate the siege with our infantry units. Now all we have to do, according to Sun Tzu, is to rage bait our enemy. If your opponent is of choleric temper, seek to irritate him, pretend to be weak, that he may grow arrogant. So by pretending that this is our capital and sitting in one spot like cancer, eventually we rage bait our enemies into killing themselves by walking into our Mongolian death trap of 300 filled with primordial rage archers. And after making all of their units retreat, this place is officially ours. 10 out of 10 tactic from Sun Tzu, need I say more? But things were not looking as good as I'd hoped for, because right outside of our Chinese Great Wall that we're actually required to protect, I noticed Village the Curseling, and I don't say it lightly when I say it, but fuck Village the Curseling. On turn 7 his army consists of 19 bold men each, with at least 100 armor and what seems to be a mandatory random deformity for the law of the game. Fighting that with a roster of mostly unemployed homeless peasants with DIY spears and bows is like a nuclear bomb versus coughing baby in real time. Thankfully we're not the ones who own the Great Wall, but unfortunately, we still have to make sure that it doesn't fall. So meanwhile village was getting closer, I made an alliance with my neighbors. Sun Tzu says that we have to be very careful while choosing our allies, because you never know the true intentions, but he also says, on ground of intersecting highways, join hands with your allies. And since we are in the middle of the geopolitical dilemma, where we have to protect the Great Wall and expand south at the same time, it only makes sense to make China great again. Unfortunately, I could not stop Village from assaulting the Great Wall, so I had to step in and make it mine. And even though I had doubts about fighting him, the only thing that I didn't have doubts about were Sun Tzu's tactics. To my disappointment, the map did not have any obvious hills, but there was a shallow water that could slow down our enemies and tire them out. And according to Sun Tzu, that's exactly what we need. Whoever's first in the field and awaits the coming of the enemy will be fresh for the fight. Whoever's second in the field and has to hasten to battle will arrive exhausted. So I put all my units behind it and wait for Village and his army of deformed tumors to come. Things were off to a great start and my plebeians managed to obliterate the first wave of sentient homunculi and Australian rats without much effort. And to my surprise, when they brought the rest of the army and started bombarding my homeless legion with the pink ectoplasm of 100 autistic gremlins, the Chinese didn't even flinch and pulverized everyone in a world record time. And once again, Sun Tzu proves his genius, and now we legally appropriated 1 out of 3 gates. Apparently Village had traumatized the Imperial Wardens so much that they agreed to give me all their territories for free. And in a way it was good, but with great power comes a lot of taxes. So now I had to spend my own yuan to hire additional lords in order to defend the Great Wall from future assaults. And as far as I can tell, that's not something that Sun Tzu would like as well. And a wise general makes a point of foraging on the enemy, 1 cartload of the enemy's provision as equivalent to 20 of one's own. After joining Confederation with Celestial Loyalists, we were demonstrating an exceptional performance at speedrunning bankruptcy, so now we had to expand and make money. Unfortunately, we don't have that many options, because right to the south we have a clan of extremely horny but dangerous rats that multiply like there is no end to their testosterone, and if we don't take care of this problem early, then they will violently immigrate into our peaceful Chinese cities and will start multiplying with our citizens, leading to a somewhat suboptimal outcome. So to be one step ahead, I gathered 2 armies and attacked their province. Just like before, I employed the tactic of rage baiting our enemy by breaking down the door and camping in one spot pretending that this is our city. And with some low-level patience, we successfully exterminated what seems to be a never-ending amount of hemorrhoid-carrying vermin and secured the capital. Unfortunately, Sun Tzu does not allow us to loot cities, so to prevent my armies from starving to death, I had to make use of a secret political money printing scheme by asking ogres to financially support our wars with nations on the other side of the globe. We effectively received free money with no risks or any other consequences whatsoever. Sure, our reliability rating might have taken a deep dive into the Mariana Trench, but in my opinion, being a morally good person doesn't feed your army. Right after thinking that, our world gets invaded by evil Mongols and Chinese history repeats itself. But when they attacked, instead of protecting our walls and not letting our enemy get inside, I left the gates unprotected to weaponize. If his forces are united, separate them by uniting all of our forces in a tight choke point and allowing an enemy to go through different entrances, which resulted in us creating a prehistoric meat grinder that no one could escape from without being penetrated. And now we could focus on exterminating rats, which was easier than I had imagined because thanks to Sun Tzu, we were able to genocide the local rodent infestation before they became a developing country. Since we were fighting in mountainous areas, most of our strategy relied on taking advantage of Mother Nature and forcing rats to come into our death trap, where we would obliterate a never-ending amount of vermin until they simply give up their will to live. Fortunately for us, these rats did not reach Sun Tzu because their only tactic revolved around throwing all of their infantry at our infantry and hoping for something good to happen. Though it's worth noting that eventually they figured out the strategy of rage bait, so they began to spawn groups of syphilis carriers into our backlines to sabotage our formation from the inside. But I'm not gonna allow some rat to blow my back out. After pacifying all of their territories, we successfully recovered from the Great Depression and started to make some money. Now, our next target was a bunch of junky dark elves. They turned out to be very unfriendly and extremely passive-aggressive for absolutely no reason whatsoever. So as a classic move, I take my two armies, accidentally trespass on their territory and attack their main province that was not even properly guarded. And meanwhile I was peacefully subjugating an entire race to the consequences of not being friendly with the Chinese, I also made sure to take care of my logistics and hired the lord that later would bring us a bunch of artillery units to fully commit to the core principle of to subdue the enemy without fighting is the acme of skill. Though I would lie if I said that everything went as smooth as I had hoped for, because eventually I had to fight a degenerate who used an octopus as a hat. His forces consisted mostly of heavily armored individuals with shields, which were a problem because they block our arrows. But arguably a bigger issue were women elves, whose only source of nutrition was an unfathomable amount of Ozempic injected into their abdomen. However, I did not give up and scouted them up for any advantages, only to find out that it's absolutely flat with a couple of bushes thrown here and there. What made it worse is that the elves were not in the mood to start the attack as well, and meanwhile it was a letdown. By listening to Sun Tzu, we could turn a negative into positive. When capable, pretend to be incapable, so I sent in one of my lords on a horse to roleplay as a brain-dead vegetable in order to bait them out to start the attack, but to my surprise their IQ was not a single digit, so I had to advance myself and go against Sun Tzu's principle of whoever's first in the field and awaits the coming of the enemy will be fresh for the fight, which I felt very bad about, but sometimes life doesn't give you a lemon to make lemonade. Just like Sun Tzu said, by separating forces of the enemy, things were actually looking good because their Ozempic-driven furies and missile infantry could not focus on any particular side. Meanwhile, my infinite stock of feudal underclass ghouls was decimating everyone in their line of sight. As you can witness, by this point we also unlocked an ancient Mesopotamian witchcraft that allows us to precision strike groups of enemies without laying a finger on them. Truly technology that Sun Tzu would die for. Eventually all of the elves gave up and Lokir wanted to retreat, but I made sure to send in an entire army and turned his life into a tragic event before he ran away. And just like that, we avoided a potential future enemy by eradicating their entire bloodline in advance. By that time my logistical drone managed to deliver artillery units and a couple of snipers to my main army, and now we possess strategic leverage against every geopolitical situation. It goes without saying that now our reliability was at an all-time high and everyone wanted to be our friend. Unfortunately, the consequences of us waging wars with nations from the faraway in the early game started to reveal themselves, and now my main province was invaded by a foul-smelling rat, whose only purpose was to transform our China into 14th century Europe. Clearly they're using, if your opponent is of choleric temper, seek to irritate him against us, so I decided to ignore the rat and let our citizens' immunity system figure it out. It turned out that my Great Wall was so great to the point that forces of evil decided to make peace with us because they couldn't break it, and of course I agreed, only to break our peace treaty the next turn when dwarves decided to agree to finance our military ambitions. Our next arch nemesis was a crocodile from the Mesozoic era. Even though I tried to ambush him, he decided to literally edge our armies and not come any closer, so I had to show some initiative. Somehow these dinosaurs managed to pimp up the turtle into an artillery with 240 meter range, with an attached solar panel and an ability to cause mass terror. Strategically speaking, we were fucked, but Sun Tzu says, throw your soldiers into positions whence there's no escape, and they will prefer death to flight, and I'm not gonna argue with that. To squeeze out all of the possible juices from our situation, I put my army on top of the hill in a very elaborate phallus-inspired formation. But before everyone could make it, dinosaurs had already started chasing us like a hungry pit bull after a newborn. Things especially were not looking good when I found out that they can channel their rage and summon a meteor that one-shotted them 200 million years back, and now they use it to one-shot my front lines instead. In my humble opinion, this battle should go straight into the history books. I had to micromanage spells, focus fighter artillery, and overall I locked in so hard that sweat started to come right out of my eyes. Eventually our human artillery acted like a plastic straw against their turtles, and somehow a bunch of my Chinese pedestrians managed to maul kill Croc to death with their Temu swords, and that was the true victory for the human race. But our celebration did not last long when I noticed a lot of highly suspicious activity beyond the Great Wall. Thankfully the combined power of 100 million farmers could overcome even the most evil of the evil forces without my divine intervention. The next on the kill list of our Chinese crusade were freaky demons, and despite an extremely threatening bio mentioning that their lord is a champion of the game, corrupter and brutal, their forces were literally non-existent, so in a couple of turns I conquered most of their settlements with a click of a button. Even the Kal herself and her army were not a problem for my 100 yuan artillery and sniper units that managed to atomize most of their malformed mongrels without any difficulties. They even tried to breach our defense lines with their Stone Age drones that ended up being perforated by 60 arrows per second, and after one-shotting the Kal with our ancient Sumerian sorcery, we have earned the right to peacefully appropriate all of Zhao Ming's real estate and finally unite China into one big country. By doing this, we became the most powerful nation on the map, but most importantly, we achieved a victory that 100% aligns with Sun Tzu's principle of winning without fighting. At that point, our forces were so strong that our entire advantage relied on discombobulating as many enemies as possible before any of them could reach our front lines. And very quickly in my pursuit of power, victory had stopped being something that brought me joy, but became a side effect of my unsatiated greed. So maybe what Sun Tzu really wanted to say is that victory is transient, but bombarding is eternal.